Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and it's Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau's comedy stylings that going up against each other when I put Gene Sax's The Odd Couple against Donald Petrie's Grumpy Old Men. And this one was a fun one to get through because both of these movies are fun mainly because Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau are one of the greatest comedy duos of all time. So let's just dive right on in to The Odd Couple, directed by Gene Saks and written by Neil Simon, based on his play. And it centers around the title, The Odd Couple, which is Felix Unger, played by Jack Lemmon, and Oscar, I don't forget what his last name was, played by Walter Matthau. But what happens is Felix Unger, his wife divorces him, and so he's kind of down in the dumps. And so he's, kind of at the end of his rope and he got nowhere to go. So he ends up staying with his friend Oscar, who hosts their weekly poker night on Fridays. And they end up, just think it's going to be cool. They're both friends and whatever. And then, when they start living together, that's when the fucking shit starts going crazy, because like Felix is a huge, like, neat freak, and it cooks all this shit and stuff. But then Oscar's like a fucking slob and he's, kind of a grouch type thing and shit. So their personalities clash. And, honestly, like for something like that, it should be a lot funnier than it is. The back and forth, you can tell it's very well written. I mean, the dialogue is really good, but I mean, it's not really like laugh out loud funny. There's certain instances that'll really get you, laugh real hard. And then they also try to get laid by these two British sisters, Cecily and Gwendolyn, or Gwendolyn and Cicely type thing. And, those broads are kind of silly and stuff, but everything just kind of goes south. And, that kind of is the last straw. They fucking end up throwing linguine at the walls and, all kinds of shit. And, they have a big blow up and then Felix leaves and ends up with the British chicks. And then, they in a way, the film itself is very well written because it does have that kind of, character growth arc thing because through all their bullshit they kind of find out they need each other no matter how much they fucking hate each other type thing. And so it's kind of beautiful at the end. They go through all this shit and then they figure out we always need the Friday night poker thing and stuff. But like I said, there's not that many like laugh out loud gags in this one. Like it's more kind of honestly it feels more like a drama than it does a comedy at times, because it does, like, the beginning of it's kind of depressing. Like, Jack Lemmon is good at, like, he had a good balance of, like, comedy and drama, and I guess some of that comes from his work with Billy Wilder, especially, like, The Apartment and Some Like It Hot. So by this time, he was kind of a pro at this kind of, because, comedy and tragedy, the only difference is timing, comedy is tragedy with timing, I guess. I may be fucking that line up, but, it is what it is. And of course, Walter Matthau was always good as like the gruff slob and stuff. And, it's been New York and like, Oscar's a sports writer and Felix is a news writer. So it's like, and it also too, noticing like Walter Matthau kind of nails that fucking overt New York accent too, so the acting in it is top notch, and then, of course, like I said, when these two were together, with one exception, The Fortune Cookie, that movie fucking sucks. But any other time that Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon were together in a film, it was fucking great, especially Grumpy Old Men, directed by Donald Petrie, and that one is way funnier than The Odd Couple. Like here instead of New York, now they're in Minnesota and it's like snow all over the place. It even opens with that song Tropical Heat Wave. I guess very tongue in cheek kind of humor type thing. But here they're old, of course, the title Grumpy Old Men. And, they kind of hate each other, but they're actually friends, frenemies, I guess, if you will. And, and honestly, the supporting cast for Grumpy Old Men is even funnier than the Lemmon and Matthau. You got Burgess Meredith plays Jack Lemmon's father, and that dude's fucking hilarious, with his, and I guess it could be, if we're looking at like comparing the two, there's of course there's plenty of sexual innuendo in The Odd Couple, but it's not as, it's a little more style. I guess it's like the changing of the times, because the movie itself came out in 1968, so you still were in that revolution of the shit you could say and do in film And of course, it being Broadway or whatever the fuck, I guess you can do, I don't know. That's neither here nor there. But when you get to Grumpy Old Men, the sexual innuendo is a lot more overt and funnier, especially when Burgess Meredith is going, did you mount her and all this shit, and because, that dude's like in his 94, I think, how old he says he is in the film. And, he's still fucking smoking and drinking and all kinds of shit. This dude don't give a fuck. He's hoping to die soon, probably, but at least, like if he was a younger man, he'd be laying pipe all over the fucking place. And of course, like, both Lemon and Mathau's children in the movie play. Kevin Pollak plays Mathau's son, and Daryl Hannah plays Lemon's son, or Lemon's daughter. My bad. But they kind of have a little romance going on too. That's been like brewing ever since they were kids and shit. And so all that, added layers of stuff. And of course, Buck Henry is in it as an IRS guy trying to take Jack Lemon's house and whatnot. And that dude always was a character, all uptight, douche nugget kind of guy. So that adds another layer. But what's really great about this film is the back and forth between Lemon and Mathau, because like they do all kinds of shit, putting dead fish in their cars to make them think they smell. And then of course we also get a good voice of reason played by Ossie Davis. That guy really did specialize in playing the voice of reason in films, and he ends up dying in the middle. Has a phenomenal date with the lovely Anne Margaret, who basically sets in motion the biggest conflict of the movie. There's always some pussy involved to get motherfuckers fighting with each other. And, because she kind of dates both of them, but, you could tell the real attraction for her is with Jack Lemmon, because he's a better fit for her, But, of course, they had a similar thing happen earlier in their life that tore them apart, which is part of the reason why they fucking are always at each other's throats and shit. And, they call each other a bunch of names and stuff. And, it's just the back and forth is what's fucking hilarious. And so this round clearly has to go to Grumpy Old Men, because it's way funnier and it's a better movie. It's got a lot more heart than The Odd Couple. The Odd Couple at times just seems a bit cruel and, kind of overt in a way that's just like, it doesn't feel like a real movie. It's just, honestly more like a play. Sometimes plays don't translate well into movies. And of course, like Grumpy Old Men is, like I said, just a better movie. It's more fun and actually has a lot more heart too, because like, it deals with life and death and love and hate and all that kind of shit, everything that makes the cinema great, emotions, the battlefield of emotions, as Sam Fuller said. And, it's crazy, like the whole previous episode we talked about directors, comparing their younger years to their older years. And, sometimes they get better, sometimes they don't. I would argue that Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau got better with age. The older they got, the more funnier they got, because, I mean, who doesn't like just hearing old people bitch and complain and fight with each other? I mean, it is kind of comical. It's even funnier than hearing kids cuss, So this round goes to Grumpy Old Men. For anybody keeping score, that's 58-48. 70s are only up by 10 now, but like I said, the 90s keep coming back with those 1-2 punches, because sometimes, moving on. And plus, you got the lovely Anne Margaret in this, and like she was, still fine as hell at this point in her career. And of course, and it's so hot that she could melt the fucking snow. You know what I mean? So, like I said, if I've said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. This is all open for debate. This is just one asshole's opinion. I'm on a self-indulgent journey to figure out which decade was better, the 70s or the 90s. The 70s had a lot of classics, but you also saw in the 90s, a lot of filmmakers and actors aging gracefully, as we talked with Robert Altman doing Kansas City, being one of his best, most personal movies, and as well as like seeing Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau as these grumpy old men is a lot funnier than seeing them as sad sack bachelors that can't get over their wives that left them and stuff. So 58-48. If you have any suggestions for anything else, 70s are up by 10 still. And, if I got like fucking 6 pages of these. Who knows what fucking, I'll probably either do this shit into my 80s or die before doing it. Who knows? But this is 70s versus 90s. Stay tuned for a whole lot more.